In my last Ben 10 video, I talked about Ben's most iconic aliens. These aliens are considered iconic for many reasons, such as a creative design and multiple use cases when it came to their abilities. Because of these factors, they get praise and recognition pretty much all the time within the fandom. Even disliked aliens may get mentioned often due to their infamy, a prime example being Fast Track, who is often mentioned not because people love him, but for being incredibly redundant since Accelerate has existed since day one, and brings little to nothing new to the table. But what about that middle ground? Aliens who are inoffensive, but also don't stand out or just often get overshadowed by other aliens. I'm sure you can name a few aliens who you find to be underrated, but for this video I wanted to give special attention to one specific alien. That alien is the explosive goo critter, Ball Weevil. Introduced in Omniverse as one of Ben's new regulars, Ball Weevil wasn't praised to the same extent as Feedback or Gravitek, but also didn't get any sort of negative rep like Blocks. Ball Weevil was right in the middle, and I want to talk about why he deserved more attention and love in the fandom, as well as maybe help give a new perspective for Ball Weevil that you may have not noticed over the years. Now that's not to say that Ball Weevil doesn't have his fans, I'm one of them, and I'm sure some of you guys are too, but I'm more talking in a general standpoint. As usual for my alien-specific videos, I want to talk about his screen time and utilization. Despite his small stature, Ball Weevil really is a perfect example of why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. Well, except for right now, since I want to start this video about Ball Weevil proper with my thoughts on his character design. Ball Weevil is an unknown species from an unknown planet, and would first appear in the Omniverse Season 1 episode of Predators and Prey Part 1. Ball Weevil's character design is one of the most simple designs we would get for an Omniverse alien, but by no means is that a bad thing. They attempt to make Ball Weevil one of Ben's cuter aliens, and I think they did a pretty good job. Ball Weevil hits that perfect blend of cute but also freaky looking given he's an alien bug. I love his yellow color scheme and I think it complements well with his green neck brace. I love the big black eyes with the tiny green pupils, and I also love the sideways mouth, which does resemble some real world Weevils. The horn also helps to make this alien's design more interesting. And speaking of interesting, despite his simple design, Ball Weevil's powers are pretty intricate. Ball Weevil's main ability is to create gooey balls made of plasma. These balls can collect surrounding material to increase their size, and whenever Ball Weevil chooses to, he can detonate the plasma he creates to explode. In fact, in a way, it kind of reminds me of how the Crash Bomber works in Megaman 2. This allows Ball Weevil to have incredibly fun and versatile ways to fight enemies, which we will see as we go through his screen time. To go over Ball Weevil's voice real quick, he is voiced by Bumper Robinson. Since this alien is supposed to be portrayed as cute, I think Robinson does a pretty good job with the higher voice. Sometimes when Ball Weevil talks or when he's moving around, there's a bug chirping sound that I think fits really well for him.
Whoa! This is a new one. Well, what can it do? I gotta have something going for me other than the power of cuteness. Are you completely out of your mind? This ritual is over. Ball Weevil, sure. Because little guys with goo balls always beat big guys with energy beams. Way Big's gonna knock this. Oh.
Ball Weevil's design is simple, cute, yet effective. His voice is also solid as well. Combining that with his interesting ability, how did Ball Weevil fail to become a big hit, as well as avoid being one of the Ben 10 fandom's punching bags? There's a few reasons that come to mind, but before any of that, let's understand Ball Weevil at a basic level with his screen time and utilization. Starting with his first appearance in Of Predators and Prey Part 1. In Ball Weevil's debut, Ben uses him for the first time to fight Tarantula. I like that the scene helps establish how Ball Weevil's abilities work. Ben himself also struggles to adjust to these abilities given that it's his first time as this alien, which is a nice detail as oftentimes when Ben got a new alien, he often got used to how they work instantly. When he first produces his plasma balls, it's almost like a cat spitting out a hairball, and when he does try to roll his first plasma ball, he struggles a little bit to keep his balance. After some adjusting, we get to see just how big his balls can be compared to his body, along with the explosive power these balls have. I also like that in addition to being able to increase the size of his balls, he can spawn little ones and kick them as explosive projectiles. On a smaller note, we also get to see some neat use of agility and mobility through small spaces given his size. For Ball Weevil's first appearance, he does a pretty good job at showing off his potential as a useful alien. While he did struggle to keep up in this fight, that struggle was because he had to fight his natural predator, so we can cut him some slack. Ball Weevil thankfully would have a lot of fun appearances afterwards that show off not just his versatility, but also just how fun he can be as an alien. In Arrested Development, we see Ball Weevil show off more rolling action. Something I like is that rolling on his plasma balls not only creates an explosive projectile, but also helps Ball Weevil have a method of fast travel. We see Ball Weevil create his biggest ball yet. Look at how it compares to some surrounding buildings, and when Ben rolls across this bridge, this shit is fucking huge. The explosion that he creates is also large and powerful enough to take out 2 Computron robots, which is nothing to scoff at. In the episode While You Were Away, we see a good example of how strong Ball Weevil can be despite his size. He is able to stop the momentum of one of his giant plasma balls all by himself. He then rolls the same ball in place to gain tons of speed to knock down some brainwashed Ravana-ganders. I think this scene is very fun and creative, although I do want to mention that this scene does make me think of one of those shitty 3D animated Strike videos. When it comes to Ball Weevil's strength, Rules of Engagement is the first episode I think of as a prime example. We see Ball Weevil create a plasma whip as opposed to his usual ball to ensnare Luma. Not only does this work, but he drags her across the ground, and keep in mind that this is a whole ass fucking Tetraman. Ball Weevil's not even a foot tall, and he's able to do this with no struggle. I also love seeing Julie use Ball Weevil as a tennis ball to defeat Luma. This tiny explosion was enough to knock back and defeat a Tetraman, by the way. Even with Julie fighting and weakening Luma beforehand in mind, that's still pretty impressive. One of my favorite moments for Ball Weevil is in the episode The Rooters of All Evil. We see Ball Weevil's plasma balls being able to absorb lasers, and given how many enemies use lasers in Ben 10, that's pretty damn helpful. Ball Weevil can also imprison people in his balls. Yes, I know what I said. I'd love if this particular attribute to his powers came back. Imagine using this and forcing your opponent to roll around in a ball that will eventually explode when you want it to. That shit sounds so fucking broken. The final appearance I want to highlight for Ball Weevil is the episode Weapon 11 Part 2. It's pretty cool to see Ball Weevil roll around the Null Void, and it's also really fun that we get to see him take on a Waybag with his explosive goo. People like to bring this up as Ball Weevil's most impressive feat, and as much as I do like this scene, it also comes across as someone just stepping on dog shit that some asshole didn't pick up on the sidewalk. Ball Weevil overall had some pretty fun moments and showcased how useful he can be. In fact, this may come off as an oddball pick for some, but Ball Weevil is among one of my top 10 aliens of all time. He's my favorite Omniverse newcomer alongside Vampire, who I already did a video on a while back. Despite Ball Weevil being quite a fun addition to the franchise, he still became one of the most overlooked aliens in the entire fandom. So let's see exactly what caused Ball Weevil to roll in the shadows. Instead of there being one major reason as to why Ball Weevil was overlooked in the fandom, I think it was mostly a combination of a few small factors that added up. There are 4 factors as to why I believe Ball Weevil was often forgotten about, and they can be simplified as length, class, weakness, and lacking. So let's take it from the top and start with length. And what I mean by length is the length of his screen time. Throughout all of the appearances that I highlighted, while they were really fun and creative, they were also incredibly short. Besides his debut in Rules of Engagement, all of his screen time in each episode is less than a minute long, sometimes even less than 30 seconds. There's even other appearances I deliberately didn't highlight because they were too short. Not only that, but Ball Weevil also just didn't do much in those episodes anyway, which also includes his final proper appearance in the Most Dangerous Game show. This type of issue isn't a stranger to Omniverse aliens, although that was more specific to later editions like Gutrot or Atomics. And considering Ball Weevil debuted back in the first season, that is pretty unfortunate. On the bright side, this issue is mitigated in the fact that these short scenes do show creative and useful traits of Ball Weevil, which is better than I can say for Atomics, who's meant to be one of Ben's strongest aliens, but that's a story for another day. The next 2 points, class and weakness, sort of go hand in hand. Similar to the point I made in my Ripjaws video a long time ago, you can make the argument that other aliens simply outclass Ball Weevil, which in this case you can argue is worse than Ripjaws given that Ball Weevil was introduced in the 4th installment, while Ripjaws was a member of the original 10. Sure, some aliens like Goop and Stinkfly have abilities involving goo, but Ball Weevil's abilities are not only utilized differently, but also have shown their usefulness multiple times. Why rely on one singular alien to do a job when you can have multiple who do that same job in different and useful ways? One drawback that Ball Weevil has that other goo-associated aliens don't usually have to deal with is the fact that he can be trapped by his own plasma, something we see in Rules of Engagement. We also see him trapped in other stuff like when he was tangled in all those socks and Cough It Up. And if an alien like Goop or Stinkfly got trapped by this stuff, they would be able to escape with ease. Not only can Ball Weevil get stuck in his own plasma, but he also can get hurt by it as well, something we see as far back as his debut. Sure, these weaknesses suck, but what weakness doesn't suck? Not to mention, what alien doesn't have a weakness? Even Alien X, as powerful as he is, has a weakness in the fact that he has to make a decision with 3 separate entities. I know Weevil and Alien X is a very drastic comparison, but I'm just trying to point out that even powerful aliens have their drawbacks. The final point is lacking, as in lacking feats. Sometimes a point some would bring up over the years to discredit the idea of Weevil getting more love in the fandom is that he doesn't have any notable feats to his name. I don't think an alien should be discredited just because he has no major feats, but for the sake of discussion, let's try to give Weevil some feats. An obvious one that comes to mind is the fact that he not only took on, but also defeated a Way-Bad in Weapon 11 Part 2. Then there's times that showcase his strength like in Rules of Engagement or While You Were Away, as well as his explosive power in Arrested Development. The one appearance I think that deserves more credit is how he defeated Agent Swift and Leander in The Rooters of All Evil. Absorbing lasers and plasma imprisonment is pretty impressive, and doubly so on enemies who are half Aerophibian and Prypiatosian B, both species we've come to see be incredibly powerful. It may not be something like defeating Vilgax or recreating the universe, but a feat doesn't have to be major to be a feat. One could argue that each issue is a nitpick at worst, but when you consider all of them, it starts to add up. With the amount of aliens introduced by the time Omniverse rolls around, some aliens just aren't going to get the same level of recognition. Thankfully, interesting stuff with Weevil doesn't just stop at his screen time, as Weevil has more media to discuss outside of the show. Let's start with the small stuff. Regarding his species lore, while we sadly don't get its name or the name of his planet, Weevil's species has a relationship with another Omnitrix alien species that I find very interesting. Weevil's species and the worst species, known as Atrocians, have a symbiotic relationship. Atrocians create disgusting messes, and Weevil's species can collect the materials from these messes as a means to clean them up. This ended up kickstarting Weevil's species into creating a successful sanitation service on other planets. I find this to be some of the most interesting lore we get from any of the Omniverse alien species. It shows how Weevil's abilities have use outside of combat, and it also makes you wonder what exactly else goes on in Weevil's species society. And before I forget, I should also mention the fact that in the online game Galactic Champions, Weevil's species is actually referred to as insectoids, although as far as I'm aware this is not actually canon to the show. And while on the subject of Weevil's species, there is one member we get to see in concept art named Habidash. I really like how cute and fun this design is, and it kinda reminds me of a little butler. Had he got to appear in the show, he would have had a small successful trash service on Atrocious 9. I'm not sure what he would have sounded like, but I can imagine it being similar to Molestache. I wish I could also say there was interesting stuff regarding his merch. Weevil sadly doesn't get a standard 4-inch figure or anything like that, but there is this tiny little figure of him, and it's cute and everything, but that's all we get for his toys. Which is a real shame considering that a 6-inch figure of him shooting balls similar to the Upchuck DNA alien hero figure from Classic would have been really cool. Then there's Weevil's artwork. Besides his concept art, there's also a what-if color scheme for Albedo's version of Weevil, as well as this cute crew member art that reminds me of Alex Kidd. Fuck that game, by the way. And since it's brief, I want to mention here that Weevil appears only in 2 Ben 10 related books, Down in the Dumps and Super Secret Crisis War, although in both cases it's unfortunately only for a panel or 2 at most. Thankfully, Weevil's game appearances are a little more interesting. I'm not that familiar with many of the Omniverse games, so I got to learn about Ben 10 Slammers, and I was shocked to find out that this is a card game. Some of the artwork is really interesting, but Astrodactyl has the posture of Captain Kuro, my god. I wish I could comment on Weevil's appearance here, but besides his icon, I couldn't find any footage of him despite the surplus of footage of this game on YouTube. I didn't find anything too interesting about this game by watching it, but if this game has one thing going for it, it's the fact that fucking Goat Zuma is in this game, and anything with her is automatically peak. I also couldn't find any footage of Weevil in the game Battle for Power, but he is in the game, I just have no clue what he does. And to continue the track record of not having Weevil footage, this was also the case for the mobile game Cavern Run, which is a sequel to the classic series game of the same name. Given this game tries to be more with actually attacking enemies, I'd imagine Weevil could have been interesting here, but again, I don't know what he does. One game where I actually did find footage of him was in the game Alien Unlocked 2. In this game, he shoots small balls to attack enemies. It's not the most interesting way to utilize his abilities, but it's no different than, say, throwing a projectile like an axe in Castlevania. And if I'm gonna mention games, of course I have to talk about Weevil's appearance in the Ben 10 game creator. Weevil creates plasma balls which he can roll across the floor until it collides with an enemy or a wall. He can even drop them like a bomb in midair, and he even does a little flip like a fucking woozy guy. This alien fucking rocks, man. Outside media helps to give a little more fluff to Weevil, but is it enough to make this alien more interesting to the fandom as a whole? It's possible, but since it's not much, let's talk about how Weevil could have been more interesting with his powers, and how some of it was sort of squandered in the process. The most common way to make an alien more interesting is to add a variety of use cases to their main ability, and many aliens often get exactly that. Some examples could be like how Brainstorm could use his electricity as a projectile, but also as a force field. Another could be something like how Lodestar could use his magnetism to move cars and shit, but also potentially bigger stuff like whole ass buildings. Ball Weevil got the opposite of that. With the stuff we see in Ball Weevil's screen time, you would think that his plasma would have near limitless capabilities and be pretty busted. The fans did think of potential use cases, but Derek J. Wyatt shot down many of these potential ideas. Since Ball Weevil's plasma collects materials and absorbs energy, one could argue that Ball Weevil can also absorb gases. This was confirmed not to be the case, though to be fair, I'm sure certain gases would burn through the plasma anyways. Ball Weevil also cannot use his slime to protect himself. I think it would be pretty interesting if he could use his plasma as a defensive shield at all times. Sort of like getting a shield in a Sonic game, or sort of like a hamster at a hamster ball. We do see Ball Weevil get stuck in his own plasma, so I suppose this was obvious. But just think about it. Ball Weevil being able to coat himself in a large ball and splitting it into multiple small explosive balls in a 360 formation while still being protected? This shit sounds fanfiction-y, but you get the idea. It's the potential that matters. One thing that does kind of sound interesting for Ball Weevil that he does have is the fact that his slime can float in water. So maybe he can sort of make walkways to avoid drowning since he can't breathe underwater. One thing I should mention is that one reason why he can't use his slime to protect himself is because he can't breathe inside his own plasma. I'm not too surprised at this. He creates the slime, but that doesn't mean it's entirely safe for him. It's sort of like how we shit, but shit ain't good for us to be around.
That's disgusting.
That's a gross comparison, but in my defense, Ball Weevil is low-key like a dung beetle. Hell, his original name at one point was Turd Burglar. He also had the name Collectaball at some point. I personally really favor Ball Weevil's regular name because it references a species of weevil. And before I forget, I should mention that Ball Weevil was inspired by Pokemon. Although I don't know if any specific Pokemon was the inspiration, or if it was because of the Pokeballs themselves. Ball Weevil having extra drawbacks with his powers can suck to some, and it does, but it also makes his powers more interesting. I wouldn't say there's a risk factor to using his powers since Ball Weevil uses his plasma as projectiles usually, but it does mean that there's more careful consideration to how Ball Weevil can best utilize his abilities. Although this is more so against enemies who can knock back his smaller projectiles or have the strength to trap Ball Weevil in his own plasma. If Ball Weevil wants to, why not just create a ball big enough to encase everything around him? We've seen him create balls as big as buildings. Could he not clear entire cities or a whole ass forest if his balls get big enough? Yes, I know what I said. Not to mention the potential with his plasma whips. In fact, one thing I thought of is like, imagine if Ball Weevil can create like an entire web of his plasma and like multiple enemies get stuck at once and then boom, all of them just blow up. That would be so fucking cool. Thoughts like this really goes to show you that even though Ball Weevil is a small alien who seems kind of weak, he, like many other aliens in Ben's arsenal, have the potential to be incredibly busted. And if more people notice that, I feel like Ball Weevil wouldn't have been as overlooked in the fandom as he was over the years. Despite Ball Weevil having some shortcomings like little length in screen time and not being as popular as other aliens, he's still an alien that I feel deserves more acknowledgement. There is a bit of bias here since he is one of my top 10 aliens, but he genuinely is a lot of fun and has so much potential. Despite his little screen duration, he already proved that he was incredibly creative and versatile. I know I've said this during one of my alien videos at some point, but a reason for an alien being one of my favorites isn't necessarily because of anything major. Sometimes an alien being super fun is all I really need. I just wish he had another longer scene or two to really shine. But as always, I want to know what you think. Did your opinion of Ball Weevil change thanks to this video? Do you like Ball Weevil more, or is he about the same for you? Perhaps you dislike Ball Weevil and you still do. Or did you always see the fun that was Ball Weevil since its introduction like I did? And while I find Ball Weevil to be the most overlooked alien in the fandom, would you agree, or is there an alien that you think fits this description better? I appreciate you guys for stopping by, and as always, happy night hunting.